So today's video is going to be a little bit different. First of all, I'm a stick figure again. I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but also we're responding to an article, not a video this time. So without further ado, let's learn how evolutionary studies suggest that atheists, whatever they say to the contrary, really do believe in God. You know those people who say that they don't believe in God? They believe in God. Written by Casey Luskin. And if you don't know who Casey Luskin is, he has a bachelor's in science, a master's in earth sciences, and some other degree in law. And according to the Discovery Institute, that basically makes him an expert on evolution somehow. So let's dive in. Over the past few weeks, a theme of discussion on the internet has been the proposal that atheists may not exist. Of course, people who think they're atheists exist, but a study discussed in Nature proposes that people really aren't functionally atheists, because we're innately predisposed towards religion. First of all, do you know what the word predisposed means? It means that you are inclined or susceptible to do something or to be a certain way. In no way does it mean that it's impossible to be otherwise. But you mention a study discussed in Nature, and if you follow the link, you'll find that it's not a study at all, nor does it cite a study, or anything for that matter, but instead it's an opinion essay. So it looks like you don't even know what you're looking at. And in no way does this essay say that it's impossible for people to be atheists. But I suppose we'll get to what it really says in a minute. In an article titled "Scientists Discover That Atheists Might Not Exist," and that's not a joke, Science 2.0 has a nice summary. And if you follow the link to this article, you find that it's written by somebody who pretty much has no qualifications to be any sort of authority in science. But instead, it's a science writer based in a creativity research lab in an anonymous university in Hong Kong. And he is fascinated by metaphysics. This is not a scientist. This is just a guy who writes about science. That doesn't mean that he knows what he's talking about. While militant atheists like Richard Dawkins may be convinced that God doesn't exist, God, if he is around, may be amused to find that atheists might not exist. So what you're saying is that while there are people who are convinced that God doesn't exist, there is no person who is convinced that God doesn't exist. Cognitive scientists are becoming increasingly aware that a metaphysical outlook may be so deeply ingrained in the human thought process that it cannot be expunged. And there's actually no cognitive scientist that is saying this. That's not how cognition works. There is nothing that we believe that it is impossible for us not to believe. And that certainly isn't what this essay in Nature is saying. While this idea may seem outlandish, after all, it seems easy to decide not to believe in God. Evidence from several disciplines indicate that what you actually believe is not a decision you make for yourself. Okay, I can't decide what I believe. I believe whatever makes sense to me and whatever seems to be an accurate representation of reality. I don't decide what I believe, but there definitely isn't something that's deciding for me. Your fundamental beliefs are decided by much deeper levels of consciousness, and some may well be more or less set in stone. No. This line of thought has led some scientists claiming that atheism is psychologically impossible because of the way humans think, says Graham Lawton, an avowed atheist himself, writing in The New Scientist. I tried really hard to find where this quote was from. No matter the amount of searching I did, I couldn't find anywhere where Graham Lawton said this. Searching for this exact quote only shows people quoting this article from Science 2.0. And in Science 2.0, he gives no citation for this. And I'm sort of getting mixed information on Graham Lawton's beliefs, but in no way does this quote make sense. There's nothing stopping people from disbelieving in God. They point to studies showing, for example, that people who claim to be committed atheists tacitly hold religious beliefs, such as the existence of an immortal soul. So that means everyone, right? There is no person who doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in an immortal soul, doesn't believe in anything spiritual. Everybody absolutely has to have something. This shouldn't come as a surprise since we are born believers, not atheists, scientists say. That's ridiculous. No child is born believing in a god or believing in anything spiritual. In fact, it's just the opposite. Newborns do not believe in God. They do not believe in an afterlife. They don't even have a concept of death. If we continue, we'll find what's actually going on. A slew of cognitive traits predisposes us to faith, writes Pascal Boyer in Nature, the science journal. That's just the thing. We are predisposed to faith. There are certain things about us that make us susceptible to believing in these things. We aren't born believing in these things. It's not impossible to not believe these things. It's just that when exposed to these ideas, humans as a whole are incredibly susceptible to accepting them. And that's what that essay in Nature is about. Adding that people are only aware of some of their religious ideas. Okay, this is ridiculous. That quote from Nature isn't saying what you're trying to make it say. This isn't saying that I believe in something spiritual or metaphysical without knowing it, but instead, if you read the context of the quote, you find that what he's saying is that of the religious ideas you have, there are underlying assumptions that are made but not consciously held. Like your idea of God's actions or intentions may be the result of unconsciously anthropomorphizing your idea of God. He goes on to list some psychological tendencies and biases that humans have and explains how those can play a role in our acceptance and ideas of religion. In no way does any of this say that atheists believe in God, they just don't know it. That's not anywhere in this essay. Boyer's article in Nature contains this line of argument. Religious thought and behavior can be considered part of the natural human capacities, such as music, political systems, family relations, or ethnic coalitions. He continues, religious thoughts seem to be an emergent property of our standard cognitive capacities. Okay, what does that mean to you? Because what the actual article means by that is very different from what Casey thinks it means. See, when Boyer talks about cognitive capacities, he's talking about things like coalitional capacity and our capacity to bond with non-physical agents. Basically, what he's saying is that humans tend to behave and perceive things in a certain way. We want to form coalitions. We want to form and be a part of a group. We want to anthropomorphize things. We experience pareidolia. And the reason why religions are so prevalent is because they appeal to these things, these tendencies, these capacities. This doesn't mean that religiosity is in itself a standard cognitive capacity, which is what I think Casey is trying to construe this as. In a striking comment, he points out that these religious predispositions exist in humans from a very young age. So what? Sure, from a young age, humans have these predispositions that make us more inclined to be religious or to have religious ideas. That doesn't mean that there's no child who isn't religious. That just means that children are still susceptible. Boyer gives every sign that he himself is an atheist, so it's not surprising that he suggests evolution is the ultimate cause of our religiosity. And there's a quote from the article that isn't anywhere near as relevant as this one. So is religion an adaptation or a byproduct of our evolution? For the time being, the data support a more modest conclusion. Religious thoughts seem to be an emergent property of our standard cognitive capacities. Notice that we've already read that quote. This quote makes more sense when it's not taken out of context. What he's saying here is that religion itself isn't a trait that we have, but instead we have certain traits, certain cognitive capacities, and these traits that we have cause us to be more likely to be religious. That's what he's saying, and that's what the evidence backs up. Again, like I said, this doesn't mean that it's impossible not to be religious. At least Boyer is being honest that it's difficult as of yet to provide a full-fledged evolutionary account of the origin of religion. He argues, however, that evolutionary attempts to explain the origin of religion challenge key tenets of religion. The findings emerging from this cognitive evolutionary approach challenge two central tenets of most established religions. First, the notion that their particular creed differs from all other, supposedly misguided, faiths. Secondly, that it is only because of extraordinary events or actual presence of supernatural agents that religious ideas have taken shape. On the contrary, we now know that all versions of religions are based on very similar tacit assumptions, and that all it takes to imagine supernatural agents are normal human minds processing information in the most natural way. So the fact that all religions think they're right and involve belief in supernatural agents means they're all basically the same? That discounts in a naive way that one comes to expect from atheists the profound differences among the world's religions. Holy shit, you didn't read the article. Let's read a relevant quote, shall we? Research has shown that unlike conscious beliefs, which differ widely from one tradition to another, tacit assumptions are extremely similar in different cultures and religions. These similarities may stem from peculiarities of human memory. So he's saying that yes, there are profound differences among the world's religions. In no way is he saying that every religion is exactly the same. But what he's saying is that these consciously held beliefs that vary widely are based on unconscious assumptions, and these unconscious assumptions are extremely similar across religions and cultures. So no, he's not saying that every religion is exactly the same. Instead, what he's saying is that people who are religious for the same reason, and in the same way. As humans, we all do the same things that make us more likely to be religious, and that these religions seem to be based on. And why should our being predisposed to faith somehow mean no religion is correct? That doesn't follow at all. Well, that's also not what he's saying. Nowhere does he say that. The closest he comes is here, where he says people who adhere to a particular faith subscribe to claims for which there is no evidence. He's not saying that people being predisposed to religion makes religion false. If he thinks that religion is false, it's because there is no evidence. That's a totally separate issue. The argument here is not, we have a predisposition to religion, therefore religion is wrong. This is a straw man that you've made up. If anything, it would seem to support a key premise of theistic religion, that God gives us a capacity and desire to believe. Okay, here's the facts. Every culture, in every place, has religion, and the majority of everybody in these cultures are religious. And as humans, we have certain psychological traits that are beneficial, and that these religions appeal to. Is it more likely that religions were fabricated, either intentionally or otherwise, and that people began accepting these religions because they are extremely susceptible to it? Or that one of these religions is the true religion, and that God made everybody want to believe. Not in this particular religion, but just in anything. The first is more reasonable, because that doesn't make the assumption that there is a God, or that these religious ideas are true. And yes, that is an assumption that you have to make, unless you have evidence for your religion, which I have yet to see. And he gives a quote from a philosopher that mostly argues against this straw man that isn't actually in the original article. But towards the bottom it says this: on top of this, we're left wondering why people would think up gods and spirits in the first place. Why would humans voluntarily sacrifice their lives for some intangible realm? Maybe it's because the physical domain doesn't contain the source of coherence, order, morality, meaning, and guidance for life. Humans, though embodied, are moral, spiritual beings. They're able to rise above the physical and biological to reflect on it and their condition. This can result in the search for a world-transcending God. Attempts by these new atheists to explain away theology is a useful fiction, or worse, a harmful delusion that falls short of telling us why the religious impulse is so deeply embedded. If God exists, however, we have an excellent reason as to why religious fervor should exist. Holy shit. Do you remember this article? This essay in Nature that you're responding to, Casey? This explains that. People are religious because we have psychological tendencies that religions appeal to. Now, these tendencies are strong, and religions can appeal to it strongly. So, of course, people can be strongly religious. And another quote from Science 2.0. If a tendency to believe in the reality of an intangible network is so deeply wired into humanity, the implication is that it must have an evolutionary purpose. Social scientists have long believed that the emotional depth and complexity of the human mind means that mindful, self-aware people necessarily suffer from deep existential dread. Spiritual beliefs evolved over thousands of years as nature's way to help us balance this out and go on functioning. Guys, do you remember the essay that you're responding to? This gives a totally different explanation of this. Am I the only one who read the article? Am I the only one who understands it? This article gives an explanation as to how our evolution gave rise to religion. And now you're going with a totally different argument from totally different people. Centuries ago, Blaise Pascal argued that if we find a God-shaped vacuum in the human heart, it is simply because God put it there. Okay, you remember this article that we were responding to that has a pretty decent explanation as to how humans have natural psychological traits that religions appeal to strongly? That's not the case. We just have a God-shaped hole because God put it there. So, in conclusion, do atheists exist? Yes. Yes, we do. And if you don't think so, just understand that you don't know what I believe better than I do.